The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the dusty plains. Luke Holloway, a rugged cowboy, rode his horse through the open desert. The sound of his horse's hooves tapping against the dry ground was the only noise in the vast, empty land. Luke had been traveling for days, the journey feeling longer with each mile. The air was hot, the sun unforgiving, and he was far from any sign of civilization. Luke wasn't a man who liked to talk much. He preferred to keep to himself, a quiet soul in a noisy world. Over the years, he had learned to trust his instincts, and those instincts had kept him alive. Whether it was riding cattle, facing storms, or battling loneliness, he had always managed to survive, relying on the strength of his horse, his ability to think fast, and a deep, silent code of honor that guided his actions. He had just completed a long cattle drive, and now all he wanted was to head home. His horse, Thunder, was his trusted companion, and Luke had depended on it for everything during the difficult journey. Thunder was strong and dependable, the kind of horse that would carry a rider through anything. Luke thought about how he had come to know this horse, how after a long search, Thunder had finally become his partner in the wide, unforgiving landscape. The horse was his last connection to the people and places he had left behind. But as Luke continued along the trail, something unusual caught his eye. Up ahead, he spotted something lying in the dirt. At first, he thought it might be an animal carcass, but as he got closer, his heart skipped a beat. There, barely conscious, was a girl. She was young, and her skin was dark, covered in dirt and sweat. Her clothes were torn, and blood stained her legs. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, only to close again in weakness. Luke's hand instinctively gripped the reins tighter. His first thought was that she might be an enemy, one of the Native Americans who often roamed these parts, either hunting or protecting their land. The tensions between settlers and the native tribes were well known, and Luke had heard many stories about people getting caught up in that conflict. But as he looked at her more closely, he realized something that stopped him in his tracks. She wasn't a threat. She was hurt, and badly at that. Without thinking, Luke pulled his horse to a stop and jumped down. He knelt beside the girl, his hands gently reaching for her to check her injuries. Her breathing was shallow, and he could see that she had been shot. The blood on her clothes was dark, indicating the injury was not fresh. She had likely been left to die here, abandoned in this harsh land. His heart clenched at the thought of how cruel it was to leave someone in such a condition. For a moment, Luke didn't know what to do. In this unforgiving world, helping someone, especially someone from a tribe he'd been taught to fear, could lead to trouble. The lawless nature of the land meant that kindness was often seen as a weakness, and people were quick to take advantage of those who showed mercy. Yet there was something in the girl's face of vulnerability and fear that tugged at Luke's heart. He had always been a man of principles, but those principles were rooted in survival, not in taking risks. He thought of his home, the family he left behind, and the many times he had lost something valuable. Yet looking at this girl, he felt a different kind of call, a kind of responsibility that spoke louder than survival alone. The rules of this world didn't matter in this moment. He had to help her. Luke didn't know who she was or where she had come from, but he knew one thing: she needed help. Carefully, he pulled her up into a sitting position and reached into his saddlebag. He found some water and gently offered it to her, holding her head up as she took small sips, her throat too dry to take in more. Her eyes fluttered open again, and she managed to speak in a weak, hoarse voice. She said something in a language Luke didn't understand, but the look in her eyes told him enough. She was grateful, though still afraid. As the sun began to dip lower, casting the land in a fading orange glow, Luke realized that he couldn't leave her here. He didn't know if she would survive the night, but he couldn't just abandon her. Looking around, he noticed the only thing that could help her get out of this desert alive: his horse, Thunder. Giving up his horse was a tough decision for Luke. Thunder wasn't just an animal. It was his partner in everything. Without Thunder, Luke would be vulnerable in the wild, alone and exposed. But the choice was clear. The girl had no chance without a means of transportation. She could not walk, and she certainly wouldn't survive the desert on foot. It was his only option. Luke took a deep breath and approached Thunder. He could hear the horse shifting nervously, as if it sensed the change in the air. Luke gently untied the reins and led the horse over to the girl. She looked at him confused, but understanding began to dawn in her eyes as he helped her onto the horse. "You'll be all right now," Luke muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. He knew that she would need to find help soon, and maybe, just maybe, this act of kindness would lead her to safety. As he helped her mount, the pain in his chest grew. He had given up his last horse, the only thing that had kept him going through the wilderness. But in this world of lawlessness and violence, a simple act of kindness felt like the only thing worth doing. Once she was securely on the horse, Luke turned away. His mind was heavy with doubt. Would she make it? Would he ever see her again? He looked at Thunder one last time, the horse now a part of the past. With a deep sigh, Luke knew that he had done what he could, even if it meant facing more danger on foot. The girl, now mounted and seemingly a little stronger, nodded in gratitude. Her expression, though weak, spoke volumes. Luke turned away, his feet sinking into the soft earth as he started his walk into the night. The trail ahead seemed longer than ever. There was no telling where this decision would lead. But in that moment, as the stars began to appear in the sky above, Luke Holloway felt something he hadn't in years: hope. As he walked, he couldn't shake the image of the girl on Thunder, riding off into the unknown. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he had made a choice that in some way felt like it could change everything. The desert was wide, and the world beyond it was even larger. But for the first time, Luke didn't feel so alone. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and red. Luke Holloway was walking along a narrow trail beside a small creek, his steps slow and heavy. The night had been long, filled with the weight of his decision. He hadn't slept much, the stillness of the desert around him reminding him of the loneliness that was always present in this wild land. His feet ached and his body felt drained, but his mind wouldn't let him rest. The image of the Apache girl on his horse riding off into the unknown haunted him. He thought about her every step of the way. Had she made it to safety? Was she still alive? The desert could be unforgiving, and even with Thunder, the chances of survival were slim. But Luke knew he had done what he could. His only regret was that he would never know what happened to her. As he knelt down to take a drink from the creek, the sound of horses' hooves broke the quiet. Luke's hand froze and his heart raced. He had been alone for so long, and any unexpected noise in this place could mean danger. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his pants, and turned toward the sound. At first, it was just a faint silhouette, but as the figures grew closer, Luke saw that it was a group of 3 Apache women on horseback, riding fast and with purpose. His eyes narrowed as he noticed their weapons, their movements sharp and practiced. The first thought that crossed his mind was that they were a hunting party, likely looking for something or someone. Luke's hand instinctively moved to the knife at his waist. He didn't know if they had seen him yet, but he wasn't about to wait around to find out. The women stopped just a few yards away. Luke could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken challenge hanging between them. The horses snorted and shifted, their riders keeping their eyes on Luke, not saying a word. For a few moments, no one moved. Then the oldest woman, who looked to be in her early 40s, spoke first. Her voice was low and commanding, and there was a hardness in it that made Luke's muscles tighten. Her long hair was braided and she wore a necklace of bones and beads. She had a strong presence, and Luke could tell that she was not someone to be taken lightly. "You," she said, her eyes scanning him carefully. "Where is she?" Luke swallowed. He didn't need to ask who she meant. It was the girl, the one he had helped. The question hit him hard and his heart began to race. He hadn't expected them to come after her. He had given the girl his horse, hoping she would get the help she needed. But now he was facing the consequences of that choice. "She's gone," Luke said, trying to sound calm. His voice was steady, but his heart was thumping loudly in his chest. He had never been good at lying, especially when it came to something like this. He wasn't sure what kind of trouble he was in now, but he had to stay cool. The woman stared at him, her gaze unblinking, as if she was waiting for him to explain himself further. "Where did you take her?" she demanded. There was no kindness in her voice, only the coldness of someone who had lost something precious and was searching for answers. Luke hesitated. He didn't want to make the situation worse by giving away too much. "I gave her my horse," he said slowly. "She was hurt and she needed to get out of the desert. I helped her. That's all." The woman didn't seem satisfied with his answer. She glanced at the other 2 women, who were watching Luke with cautious eyes. One was younger, no more than 20, and the other was slightly older, perhaps in her 30s. The younger one's eyes were filled with anger. and Luke could tell that she was ready for a fight. The older woman, however, seemed more measured. She had the look of someone who had seen many battles in her time and knew how to pick her fights. "Why?" the older woman asked after a moment, her voice softer now. "Why did you help her?" Luke wasn't sure how to explain. It wasn't about loyalty to a tribe or a people. It was about seeing someone in pain and choosing to help. It was as simple as that. But he knew that to them, it wasn't simple at all. In their world, helping an enemy was almost a betrayal. "I couldn't leave her," Luke said, his voice quiet but firm. "She was alone and hurt. I couldn't turn my back on her." The younger woman scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "You expect us to believe that?" She snapped. "You gave her your horse. You helped her escape. Why would a settler do such a thing?" The older woman, who Luke now understood to be the leader, raised a hand, signaling for the younger one to be quiet. She then turned back to Luke, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deceit. "You're not like most settlers," she said after a long pause. "I can see that in you. But we are not so easily fooled. We don't trust people like you." Luke stood still, unsure of what to say next. He knew that trust was something earned, and in this world it was hard to come by. But he had acted on what he felt was right, even if it meant risking his life. The older woman finally nodded as if making a decision. "We won't kill you today," she said, her voice calm but final. "But you must never come near our people again. If we find you again, we won't hesitate." Luke didn't argue. He simply nodded, grateful for their mercy. He had no illusions that he would ever be forgiven by them, at least not in the way he had hoped. But this was a start. Without another word, the Apache women turned their horses and rode off into the desert. Luke stood there for a long moment, watching them disappear into the distance. His heart was still racing, but he was alive, and that in this world was something to be thankful for. As he watched the horizon, Luke couldn't help but think about the girl, Taza. He hoped she had made it to safety. He hoped that his act of kindness, however small it seemed, had made a difference in her life. He had given her his horse, his last horse, and in return he had received nothing but the promise of survival. But perhaps that was enough. In the end, survival was all anyone could ask for in this wild, unpredictable land. The wind picked up and the desert grew still again, as if nothing had happened. But Luke knew that nothing was ever the same after you made a choice. The road ahead would be lonely, but at least he could walk it with a clear conscience, knowing he had done what he thought was right.